once you've trained them, they're just there. They don't know anything from query to query. Everything else happens outside of them. So this notion that you're just going to throw an AI in and it's going to go discover customized answers to things on its own isn't the case. That's why the architecture changes so much, because you have to build this agentic framework that interacts with the generative model and actually does the work of building this context, because the model itself is not learning anything about from query to query.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Fearless Founders podcast. Guess what? We got Keith back. We're excited to have you again, Keith. You're terrific. We are excited. We don't need to do much, but just jump in. And Ike and I were talking about many of the topics you could help us understand, particularly our guests. Ike, launch right into it, bud. Ask the question.
Let's do it. So I have two types of founders that call me and ask questions. One of them is they have started their company maybe 2-3 years ago. They have about $1 million ARR, just so you know the size of it. They have zero AI, and like that, now they're thinking, like, I need to bring AI features in. I need to put Copilot here, some chat, and some all that stuff. Like, I need to pretty it up and then with the AI so that I can be treated as AI company. The other ones, in the same area, like again, like let's assume $1 million ARR, they're thinking, okay, these LLMs are a different mindset, different world. I need to change my architecture from ground up before it's too late, because every day I'm creating technical debt for my future. Right. How do I restructure the whole thing and think about? So you're very technical. You have some great articles on how AI works. So can you tell us like how you think we can advise our audience a little bit?
So first of all, due warning, I'm fairly opinionated in a particular direction around the quote unquote AI universe. I'm an enormous fan of what the new generative technologies can enable, but I am very skeptical about even the term AI. I mean, the best definition of AI I've ever heard was a very poor choice of words in 1954. And just by way of background, I mean, I've been observing the AI universe. I entered the AI universe, so to speak, with Marvin Minsky at MIT in the late 70s. And what he was calling AI was entirely different. It was about a theory, a computational theory of mind. It was philosophy, more than anything else. What we call AI now is generative models, specifically generative models. That's what they are. They're based on the same core technology that machine learning was based on and has been used since, for the last 15 years. Sometimes people would call it machine learning AI. And by the way, one thing you should ask yourself, are you using machine learning adequately in your platform? Before you worry about generation, there's a lot of things you can do if you have a lot of data with machine learning. And it doesn't require generative models. The place where you get into, if all you're trying to do is pretty up and add quote AI into your mix for investor pitch decks, I don't have too much to add to that. Go forward, be happy. Don't ask me to look at it because you won't get a good result. But if you are seriously contemplating what can I do with these new models, it isn't a light lift, first of all, because they work very differently. Depending on how you've architected your system, you may have to completely re-architect large pieces of it. Most of what the magic in using AI is all about the software. There is an AI that goes around the model. The model is, this is something people lose, and they get very confused when they talk about, the coming super intelligence and all that. Most of what's going on is happening in the agents, the software around the model. That's the real work. The way you use the LLM is, first of all, as you're using the agents around the model, is you're building up something called a context window. I'm giving you a brief underpinning of what this actually is. And you're doing that by retrieving data from various places, and you might use the LLM to guide you through how to do that. Now, you can already see that that's a different architecture than a pure transactional architecture. It's many iterations on a single query just to build up and gather up the right information to generate a final result. Now, the nice thing about the final result, and the reason to use these techniques, is you can produce a much more customized, adaptive result, depending on what you're doing. You can also control things, but most of the folks who are doing this these days, at the moment, are using it in some kind of a modified chatbot form. And so, for example, they might be building a human resource system that previously, if you went into the human resource system and tried to find out how your coverage in a particular set of circumstances worked, you'd get back a pro forma answer. They direct you towards some document, which you'd try to read and make sense of, and you'd be on your own. You'd end up calling somebody to explain it and all of that. The opportunity with these new technologies is to build a system like that that actually goes out, gets your policy, gets all the related material, analyzes it in some sense for you, and produces an actual answer for you, maybe a manual that's completely customized to your circumstances. You can do that with these generative models. That's the beauty of them. They have the ability to generate actual language and to reason in some sense, in a loosely structured reasoning over a whole bunch of material to figure out what's relevant. So, that's a reasonable transition to make, but as you can see, it's an entirely different platform. If you consider that human resource platform case, it's two entirely different platforms. One's just going into some document management system and pulling out documents, and as a result, it can only let you do very limited queries because it only knows how to find documents in a very limited way. Now, I warned you I might go on for a while.
No, it's great, yeah.
Whereas, with this more with a generative model with an LLM in the mix, and the agent that knows how to cycle and use the LLM to build the context, you can pull all kinds of useful information and then reason over it in a customized way for this user. What you can't do, and this is where a lot of people get confused about AI, I'll use the term generative model if it's okay, so that I don't offend myself by saying AI. What a lot of people are confused about is they think they can just throw in a model and it will learn all about you. And that's not what happens with LLMs. They are GPTs, and that stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Forget the generative part we talked about. The transformer part is irrelevant. The thing I'm getting to is the pre-trained part. Once you train them, they're just there. They don't know anything from query to query. Everything else happens outside of them. So this notion that you're just going to throw an AI in and it's going to go discover customized answers to things on its own isn't the case. That's why the architecture changes so much, because you have to build this agentic framework that interacts with the generative model and actually does the work of building this context, because the model itself is not learning anything about from query to query. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. Anyway, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So, where do people start? There's the ways that you can improve the user interface as user experience. Then there's the area that the backend system, where you can remove the business logic that you work so hard to build and replace that with this generative AI.
Depending on the nature of the business logic. For example, if you have a completely transactional platform that's just, you're buying something and that part of it, you don't really want to mess with that, because that needs to be repeatable and exact. When I buy an item, I want it to go through a precise cycle. Now, to find that item, to search for that item in a more free-form way, you might get some benefit out of it. You really need to ask yourself, you need to understand, okay, I can do this sort of more customized generative approach that opens up the queries from a narrow set of queries to sort of open-ended free-form queries in my world. What do I want to do with that? That's how I'd recommend starting. So
Yeah.
again, in the case of the HR system, just to keep using that as an example, if you're going to set out to do that, you say, well, okay, the problem I have right now is all I can do is return a document to somebody who wants something from me. And that never really works very well for anybody. So I want to digest the document and produce an actual result. That's my goal. Now I have a goal and it makes sense. I'm not just throwing AI in there. I'm throwing AI in there or generative models in there because I want to get from just spitting out documents to actually spitting out the information somebody is looking for, and not just a sort of fixed set of questions, but they can ask me anything about the subject.
Yeah, this makes sense. So the way I advise people that are calling me about these, again, and let's again, we're assuming it's a $1 million ARR business, seed going to Series A type, right? At this stage, your job is either provide a solution that is 10x better than what's out there, so you can disrupt them, or find a technology for the same problem you're trying to solve, but do it in ways that it's never been possible before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like again, it needs to focus on, in my mind, the problem that the customers have,
Mm-hmm.
and how do I solve that problem in ways that was not possible before. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The thing is that if you have if you've built yourself to $1 million ARR with a product that is genuinely innovative and new and solves a whole new class of problems, so you're already on an arc, and you didn't, assume generative models to begin with, there's a good chance that this isn't a good time for you to suddenly say, oh, I better throw in some, again, unless you're doing it for window dressing, there's a good chance that you will mess up your arc if you do that, and you might want to wait for the next, when you're ready for your next major generation, to re-architect it and fundamentally expand, what you can do. Because if you remember from our last conversation, I just entered a market. Good news, I figured out how to get into this market with a product that people will actually use, get by their objections, all of that hard work, and they're actually using it. And I'm now at the subtle point where I'm trying to say, all right, I got into the market with 5% of what I really wanted to do, but it's got people using it. Now I need to start ramping that up. That's your job. And
not to throw away and then restart
right.
all over again, because just getting that stage was already a huge.
You worked so hard and had to do so much thinking and planning. You need to execute on moving that forward. Is that the right time to switch horses and fundamentally change your offering?
Keith,
I want to start thinking about it, but
yeah. But I have also experienced personally that many times when you launch the initial product, even if it's 5% of what you want it to be, it's not enough. And so you start desperately seeking to augment with some AI. I think that's more regular. That's more likely.
So if in the scenario we talked about last time, if you recall, the notion was you already knew what you really wanted to do, right? And you came into the market to get into the market with something much simpler. Mm-hmm. So then you don't have that problem. If you got into the market and that's all you had, and then you have that problem regardless of whether you're using AI or not. True. So the problem is not an AI or generative model problem. Right. The problem is you didn't think through what you were going to do for your second piece. Right. You'd better get moving on that, because if you're lucky enough to have gotten to the market with whatever it is and you don't have something in mind already, you'd better figure it out. It may turn out that you need to use generative models or you want to use, that it's a good idea to use a generative model. But there's you're likely to either do something so different or throw away so much of what you've got.
Yeah. I think having access to customer at any stage, right? Whether you're $1 million ARR, 10 million, or $100 million, having access to customers, giving you feedback, giving you the information like about their challenges, what they are fed up with every day, what they would love to have to make their lives easier. Like I think like as founders, it's our job to listen, whether you're listening to 5 customers or 100 or 1,000, right? Continuously find ways to improve that, and hopefully through using the latest technology, your job is a little easier to solve their problems in ways maybe sometimes they can't even explain. Right? Like that's the goal, right? Not to throw away everything. Oh, I'm just gonna start this new shiny object because stuff
Right.
from the technology.
Now, having said that, if you weren't thinking about these new models, the generative generation of these models, when you started, then you probably weren't using them internally either. So one thing you can and should do, these are really great tools. I use ChatGPT as my personal research assistant for all sorts of things, and I don't ever really trust it, and I never use it to do a finished product of any kind. But boy, does it save me time, either on the research side, making sense of, you get some feedback from a customer, you're trying to make sense of it. Talk to ChatGPT, let it go out and search the web for all the references and all the competitive products that this person may be seeing and whatever, and tell you, and give you some insight. You'll save a lot of time. You'll be able to respond a lot faster. I'm not a big fan of pure vibe coding, as they call it. If you're familiar with that,
I've been doing it, love it. I can't sleep because it's like I'm hooked.
Okay. I have used coding and generative models to assist me in coding. I never just say, go build this system. But, I've always been someone who, I don't hold all of these libraries and how they work in my head. I've always depended on Google to tell me these things. And with ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot or any of these other tools like that, you just skip a whole lot of pain of looking up examples, and it generates an example that is close to what you want. Yeah. Again, I wouldn't trust it to just take it and slap it into production, but it certainly saves you. So again, there's the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to put it in your product to be using these tools effectively. You can use them in your internal process. You can encourage some companies. Yeah. People are afraid to acknowledge that they've done it. I would say, go, please save a day on your next sprint, right?
Mm-hmm. Smart.
Ask whatever model you're using to do the first pass on this code, and then just take that as your starting point. Please. So there's more than one way to get that stuff into your universe.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
And the line of questions I had from our last time, particularly with your technical prowess, having started so many businesses on the development side, what is the delineation when you start a business and you're starting to code between when you hire people permanently in-house versus using offshore versus using nearshore? Because that's always a topic, because you don't have money, you don't have resources, you have an idea, and you may or may not have a technical person on your partnership side. How does it work? What's the best way to do that?
So I have my preferences, and some others do things differently, but I always tell people, find a small number, 2, 3 very strong engineers, and hire them and make them your anchor. And with that team of 3 or 4 strong, I mean, when I say strong engineers, I'm not talking about somebody who's got 5 years of experience. Well, but I shouldn't talk in terms of years of experience, because that's not always accurate, although it often is, but it isn't always accurate. But you want the kinds of people who, you don't have to tell them what to do. They'll do the right thing, and they won't go off and do something, on a tangent or whatever, because that's another problem you can have with your early team, is people who are just going off in random directions. These are, if you hire the right strong people, they'll understand what they need to do. They'll ask you when they need to know, well, okay, what's the real purpose of this part of the system, or something like that. But once you tell them that, and once you give them the general direction, and you give them the parameters that you think are important, they'll just do it. And they'll understand how to explain what they've done. And if you do that, then you have some freedom about where to go next.
So what you just said is, regardless of your money situation, you highly recommend that first-time founders pay, cajole, bribe talent on the
kidnap,
right?
whatever it takes,
Whatever it takes, pizza, up to 2, 3, 4 talented people.
I would say 2 to 3 is probably all you need.
Okay.
And to some extent, it depends on just how technical. I'm biased. Most of the projects I work on they're heavy lift kinds of projects where the code, the technology is the heavy lift. A lot of businesses, that's not true. And I'm not really prepared to speak to those. There's a lot of businesses that are just building fairly generic software underpinnings because their magic, I'm actually working with at least one company that, is where their magic is not anything heavy in terms of technology. It's the fact that they've understood that in the world of building certain kinds of consumables, there's a lot of spare capacity, and if they harness that, they can do on-demand. This happens to be bespoke furniture, and it turns out that the way this stuff getting by, like the cabinets you put up in your kitchen, that all have to be custom, and they've realized there's all this spare capacity that they can just grab, and and so you don't have to go to some other country to get it all built and wait weeks. Great, there's no real technology there. It's the technology is trivial. It's the fact that they've realized that they can grab this stuff. Okay, they could probably outsource from the day one. They don't need anybody really strong. They might need somebody to advise them so that they don't do anything really stupid. But there's nothing. It's a website with a database and a little bit of logic around it. It's not much. Okay, fine. They can outsource from day one. They don't need this stuff. But that's not my typical bailiwick. That's not what I tend to do. So, if you're building a brand new IoT concept or a security play that is, massively complex but solves a problem in a way that wasn't done before, or any, something, you're dealing with heavy lifting. You need that strong team internally. So,
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how I'm jumping to the next one. Keith, what I see sometimes, there's an eagerness to hire a lot more people in the engineering and product and delineation area. Like I think sometimes the founders see these titles these big companies have, even like the growing startups. There's the chief product officer, which is chief technology officer, and like I sometimes, like even VCs recommend these. Hey, you're just going to be growing, so you better start hiring these people.
There's
right?
a lot of investors. We've talked about investor pressure the last time. There's a lot of pressure you'll get from your investors that is not necessarily good for your business, right?
Yeah.
And
so can you talk about these? Like sometimes all you need is VP of engineering, and then the founder talking to customers and then getting it done. You may not need these.
I would say what you need is a CEO who is good at business development, and who understands the product. You don't need a sales team per se, because you're not selling. You're probably not. Again, I'm talking about these relatively technology dense companies that are doing truly disruptive things. You're probably not selling in an open way. You're probably doing more like business development, very selected, targeted sales to a few key anchor customers, right? So you don't need a sales team. You want a CEO who can do that, preferably, without handing it off. And the CEO will hopefully have the full vision of the company, fully embedded in their brains, as will the CTO. If you have a good CTO, the CTO can do, my take, product and technology. If you've hired those strong engineers, they don't need as much management. You don't need a VP of engineering yet. You will, but you don't need it yet. You know, you can rely to some extent on those engineers. If you bring in, let's say you hire 2 or 3 strong engineers, and then you hire an external team for some of the lighter lifting, maybe the front end, the portals that you're building, you can outsource them. Depending on just how subtle they have to be. There may be some standard kinds of integration and shims you need to build, and you might outsource them, right?
So Keith, give us some signals or guidelines the founders can look like. Like there's a $1 million ARR business with 3 engineers and 1 CTO, and if you scale that up to, there's a CTO with 200 employees, 50 engineers, you know, like the full marketing development. That is a huge range. And then some people will whisper your ear, higher. But what are the signals you can say, okay, if you see this, then hire this person. If you see that, hire this person.
Right. So if you're starting to get ARR of any significant, I mean, a lot of companies get by on some NRE, you know, that they might scrounge up. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But if you actually get, you know, unless you're dealing with a company that will do very large NRE that looks like something else. I mean, I have seen, you know, multi-million-dollar NRE, quote unquote NRE packages that are really investments of a sort.
Yeah.
But when you get to the point where you've got a product out there and people are paying for it, you need to start thinking about expanding your team. That is a good time to start expanding your team some. I mean, whether or not you need to go to sales yet depends on what your funnel looks like from your early biz dev work. You still may have enough activity there. You don't really want to start selling broadly, because when you start selling broadly, the requirements that come in will start becoming significant, right? So you know, and that then you really will need to scale up, and you may not be ready because you're still working on some core things. But the point where you've got something in the market and people are using it, as a minimum, you're going to start having lots of bugs to fix, and you're also going to start having lots of feature tweaks. You'll have major things you want to do, but lots of feature tweaks that don't require the level of skill to implement necessarily, but you want to do them quickly. And so you may consider at that point, you know, adding in either junior engineers to do some of that work or outsourcing to do a lot of that work under the watchful guise of your core team. Now, it's a trade-off there, because you will be relying on your core team to guide these folks. You might consider at that point bringing in a VP of engineering when you're bringing in these external resources, because you do have to put some process in place. You know, the strong team I'm talking about doesn't need as much process. Well, they'll intuitively have their own process. It will be there. It just won't be written down, right? When you start bringing in external teams, you need process. And for that, you need somebody who does process. And if the CTO is if the CTO is me, for example, you don't want me to be the guy who is enforcing your process. Because I can write up a process document, but I'm probably not going to spend much time enforcing it. It's not my nature. So you probably
that's just like a tidbit for our founders. When you're looking for a CTO, you need to understand what you expect from the CTO. Hire the CTO for that. Like there's different variation of CTOs.
Yeah. And there are folks who are very good CTOs who are much more process oriented than me. I do find that too much process too early is a problem. The right amount of process is the right amount, and it helps. And again, if you have a strong team, hopefully, and this is my own laziness speaking here. You know, I don't want to have to enforce process, so I want people I can rely on to act as though there were processes in place, even if they're not formally in place. a different personality might lean a little bit more heavily on process. But to me, the point where you really do need process is when you start bringing in either less senior people, you start expanding the team a bit, or bringing outsourced people in.
Yep.
You need a process then, because if you don't have a process, you're going to get mud.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you need somebody who can run a process and insist on it.
I see that a lot, because ultimately what you do is you think that you can put a new employee, a new team on top of the existing ship, but you haven't fixed the holes in the ship of the original hull. And so all you do is get to the same level of complexity, maybe more now with more humans. So with what you just said in that balancing act, I want to go a little further into this topic. So internally, you got the engineers. You're trying to figure out how things are. Do you continue? Would you say ideally, for controlled reasons, quality, it's always better to hire in-house than to even do fractional teams overseas, lower cost, remote?
There's an awful lot of stuff that an outsourced team, wherever they are, can do just fine. And it is really not worth the trouble of, because when you hire people, you have a responsibility that that you're taking on. If you outsource and things shift, it's easier to get rid of them, and things are not going to be all that stable at this stage. So I'm not at all averse at that stage where you've done the main body of the work of the initial version and you're expanding it. I wouldn't say you can just dish everything out to an outsourced team, but as I said, there are lots of things that you can outsource. And now there are patterns, by the way, even on some of the services you've built and so forth. There are patterns there that you can say, do them like this, right? So it becomes a little easier to guide them. As an example, you might have a data layer over your database that's handling how, and now you've got you want to change your business objects, your business model, your data model a little bit, but you've already got it there, and you've already got examples of how you want tenancy to work and how you want security to work at the data layer. All that's there. It's been built. And all they have to do is replicate that for a new object.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say that you could probably outsource that at that point. How far off can they go before you find out that that they've gone off? It's one service, one object, and they've got stuff to look at.
Yeah, easy to track. Yes. You isolate the trouble so much cleanly.
Right. So I think at that point it starts to make a lot of sense to look outside, because, as I said, hiring junior engineers, it's a lot of babysitting you'll end up having to do, a lot of tracking them. It's not completely easy.
No. That's why there's a whole industry on recruiting talent acquisition. Can I ask, where I have had many clients say, I do not know where I can get talented people who want to join a startup, make an impact. Where do I find them? And I'm bringing up a very generic question, but it's an important one that I get asked all the time. So how do I hire quality people from the get-go?
Well, so you probably want to use your network as much as possible. That's the first place to look, because those first few hires are so critical. The more you know about those people, the better off you are. So I try to seduce people in my network, into joining this thing, and whatever it happens to be. If you can't, then you start to look outside. You're not going to. There are people who want to join a startup. There are people for whom that's an attractive, interesting thing to do. They're ready to do it, right? They've made the decision. Sometimes they've been people who have been in bigger companies, and the danger there, of course, is they don't quite know what they're getting into, but they may be very strong. And if you as the CTO connect with them and spend enough time with them beforehand, you may get a good feel if this will work.
Yeah.
And you can bring them in. You can't just, there's no one place to look, but there are people out there who want to do this. It's their time of life. Either they've done it once and it didn't work and they want to try it again, or they're ready to jump into one. So they're there.
I was sorry to interrupt. Finish your thought. I have something else.
That was largely it. I mean, they're out there. You have to filter for them. You have to make sure that they know what they're getting into, or they have a realistic sense of what they're getting into. So you need to do a little bit of therapy with them beforehand, and probably a lot of therapy once they're in shock after they first join. But that's okay. You do it. You help them. You mentor them a little bit, and then they become solid parts of your team. If you know them already, that's even better. As I said, that's the best. If you're bringing in people that you know, I have a group of people that I will, every time I get involved in one of these things, if I decide I'm going to help trying to hire, they're the people I reach out to.
Thank you.
I'll have one comment and then a quick question. If you don't know anybody, when you're interviewing people, what I found is it's good to ask if they know others that can join the team that they worked with before. Sometimes from those engineers, I get, I don't know anybody. All my people are already employed, and or you get, yes, I have a few people that we worked with well before in the past.
You're using that as a probe as to their appropriateness.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a new one for me. I'll have to try that one.
You should.
I like it. I like it.
Cool. My question. So we talked about how hard it is to hire these junior developers. Like, when you add more people, the management of it, especially at the junior level, just increases exponentially.
Yes.
The manager. So I understand you said we can outsource them, especially if it's just, here's the function, here's the new features for this function, and I want you to do this. But the hype or rage or whatever you want to call it these days is to do that with the development agents, right? Like I have this function that needs to be updated with minimal things that I was going to outsource. Now give that to Anthropic's Cloud Code or Copilot agents that will do it and then come back to me later. What are your thoughts on that? Taking us back to the original AI discussion.
Yeah.
Like a lot of Copilots are being built for the IDEs.
You should use them. There's no question. You should use them. That's not an alternative to outsourcing. Everybody should be using these tools. They will speed you up. You can't use them blindly, right? You still need to know what you're doing.
Of course.
Because you can't put enough into the context of describing what you need that it's going to do a perfect job. I mean, even if it could, it's going to, because you'd have to give the entire code base that you've already built to this thing, say, here's how we're doing it, first understand, the styles and all that. And here's the detailed requirements. And here's how, here's all the things that are in, which you don't even know because you don't think, you have these implied checklists in your brain. Well, I don't know if you do. I tend to have these implied checklists in my brain that I couldn't possibly enumerate, sufficiently. So what I'm going to get back is at best an approximation. Now, an approximation fast is a huge productivity gain. So you should be using them from day one. Your strongest engineers should be using these tools. They're not an alternative to outsourcing. They are a massive improvement in productivity.
Yeah, I agree. Like I'll tell you a few of my experiences. You're absolutely right. You cannot just let it do what it wants to do. You have to understand what needs to be done, and you have to direct it that way. But it's also so much productivity improvements. Like I'll give you guys two examples that I had recently. These are the first, the positives. I have this code that I need. Like I have this idea, I need to make this happen. Write this code. I give the requirements. The system comes back and says, yeah, I can create this application. Here's the logic. I wrote the code. Would you like me to install the database, deploy it, and create this schema, and then create all the databases? I said, yes, please. Like just like that.
It does,
And then like something happened. I tested. I said, this is not working. There's a bug. He goes, let me write a test script so I can test the results. Right? Like, these are huge gains of productivity. On the negative side, I was the one who had to tell the system, okay, now tie this test script to the function, so that every time we make a function change in the function, run this test so that show me that we are not breaking anything else on the code. So you have to understand that, you have to give it.
Right.
The other part was, there was this algorithm, the system, I told them the algorithm needs to be fixed, and it tried 2-3 times, it couldn't. All it's on says, oh, I'm just gonna make a mock data so that this function returns mock data. And then I happened to hit the yes button because I was so, happy with the results previously. Then I 2 hours later, I'm testing this thing is returning mock data. Like, why is this happening? Why did it happen? And I had to trace back.
Remember what you said yes to. There is a danger. You need to know what you're saying yes to. And the thing with generating the schema, the way there's a degree to which I would trust that if you're doing object relational or object document modeling, where you have an object model that you've designed, and you're saying, particularly if it's over a SQL database where you really do need a schema that has to be generated. Yeah, I would trust it to generate a schema from that model without having, and that's a huge savings, because God knows how. I mean, the bugs you get from having to write your own schema that's the same as your object model, and without conflicts, can be terrible. And while we're on the subject of this, another area is and you mentioned testing. Unit tests. Vast majority of unit tests that I see are a complete waste of time, because all they're doing is they're testing the code as written, because especially if you have people who are obsessed with coverage, right? Because coverage, in my humble opinion, tells you almost nothing. I mean, it's this useless thing. The only kinds of unit tests that matter are unit tests that tests a sufficient block of code, a sufficient subsystem that is capturing some interesting interactions. It's not really quite a unit test anymore. But those are a pain in the butt to write, because you've got to emulate so many things in order to make those systems work. So people often don't do them. But if you do them, then you really are writing something that will catch stuff in the future and currently. And I have had some good success using Copilot and things like that to put those things together. And Lord knows, if it was left to me, I'm too lazy. I probably wouldn't do it, and that's a shame. Whereas I can get Copilot to put up a subsystem test that, creates all the emulations, all the mocks, and mostly is there. And, once you've done that, it becomes a lot easier to write the next test, the next test, the next test on top of it. So that's an example of how to use this stuff for productivity.
May I take the conversation with a few minutes left in another direction? Because
we're getting way too geeky, and I can see you're getting bored.
Yeah, I'm bored. So Keith, help me understand. I see a continual dearth of leadership investment in the engineering leaders. We hear of all of the coaching and training and support for almost every other C-suite kind of a group, but not the CTO, not the VP of engineering, and yet they sometimes can have one of the biggest groups of humans on payroll or on staff.
Yeah. The answer is mentoring. I mean, I agree with you. And there is a lot of performative kinds of things out there that are supposed to support the growth in various ways of your engineering employees, but they're mostly not very useful. The only thing I've seen that works is mentoring. It's hard to do that with the CTO. The CTO had better be the mentor, rather than need the mentoring. But I have been the beneficiary of a couple of enormously wonderful mentors in my life that utterly transformed the path of my career. And I've also learned from some other people who were willing to mentor me. Not they weren't as dramatic, but that taught me things.
Like what? Like what? Because I want to know what some of those elements are that engineering leaders face. I cannot think of anything that would be different than any leadership issue. But are there unique elements of leading bright engineers that other leaders don't have?
Well, it depends on where you're leading them. So when I was talking about the mentors, one of the mentors actually led me out of pure engineering so that I could think about markets and business issues and things like that. So that was actually not mentoring me as an engineer. He was mentoring me as I was already a VP of engineering at that point, and this is a guy who sort of opened my world up so that I can have these conversations that we had about how to get into a market and understand that I wouldn't, at the point where he entered into my life, I would have known nothing about that. So that's one thing. But within engineering, you need to be, it probably needs to be someone who is sufficiently technical. You're not going to mentor somebody if you're not yourself an engineer, and engineers are strange fish, or whatever beasts we are.
Excuse me.
I'm up there. I am as strange a fish as anybody else out there. You'd better be credible as an engineer. My style when I'm involved in it with an engineering team, as I said, I'm not a process guy. I'm not a command and control guy. I don't think you can teach people through command and control. It's all about influence, getting people to trust you. So I have my own style of doing that. And along the way, by doing that, I can mentor people very effectively. And part of it is getting them to come to you. Yeah. If you want to be a mentor, you've got to get these people to be willing to come to you. So you want to be useful. So my own personal style in doing that is I make sure that it's clear that if you're on a team that I feel responsible for, that you can come to me with any problem. I'm not going to tell you you're screwing up, and I'm not going to tell you you're behind schedule. I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to get you unstuck. And you do that a few times, and the people start realizing, oh, go to Keith, and he'll get you unstuck. And by the way, you might learn a few things along the way. So all of a sudden, I have people just coming to me, and what that lets me know is, by the way, from a management standpoint, I have a situational awareness as a result that no manager will have just by giving orders.
Yes.
Because people are coming to me and telling me what their problems are.
Yes. And what you just told me was invariably better leaders, I don't know about best, are servant leaders who help any of their subordinate teams, mid-level managers, whatever, to the point that they earn the trust that they come to you,
right?
That you can unlock them, help them with whatever the blockage is.
Yeah, you got to be willing to do that. By the way,
I have to interject. I think as you become a leader, like let's say from engineer to manager to director to the VP and all that, you're going up. There's definitely an aspect of people management, helping your people advance their careers, do their job well, and protect them from outside world. That I agree with all that. But as for yourself, as you move up the ladder from like manager, director, VP, and all the way up, you have to learn the business and the strategy side of things. Mm-hmm. And as you move up, you are, I think, you can look at further down the line of where the business is going, and that's only possible if you talk to your peers at the business level, the strategic level, And if you're a director, you're looking 3 months ahead, or you're a VP, you're looking at 2 years ahead of where the company, product, sales, capital is going to be, then you can actually guide your team.
Well, that's
on
exactly.
like how to get from here to there. Do you know what? Like, it's not just about the team, taking care of your team. You have to learn the business.
Because there's a magic skill in terms of helping people that gives you. And because when somebody comes to me with a problem, my solution is often not, oh, well, you code it like this. Sometimes my solution is, I know the various balances of what's important from the business standpoint, from the markets, and I know how they interconnect. And I can see that. And so when somebody comes to me and I see, well, they're stuck, but they're really stuck because you bounce up 2 levels and you realize the requirement was written in a very specific way because it seemed reasonable at the time, but it doesn't have to be that way because I know enough about all this stuff out here to say, we can shift that requirement. It's okay. And by doing that, I can get that person unstuck.
Yes.
So that's a superpower you get
Yes.
by understanding the context in which everything is happening.
At the same
context, the market context.
Yep. You're that much more at a strategic 30,000-foot level to see beyond the tight deadlines and everything else. With that said, last comment, we're going to run out of time. So why is it then that I often see that CEOs, founders who may not be technical, and CTOs have a fairly prominent wall between them, where the CEOs have told me that they feel like they're held hostage, that they feel like the engineers are the inmates running the asylum. And these are strong words, but they feel that like they don't know what's going on.
Well, I can tell you from the other side, having been the engineer who felt like I was held hostage, to product managers who were out there espousing or demanding things that because somebody in the market said, I need this, and establishing dates of deliverables without having any idea, So I've seen the other side as well. Communication, you bet. I mean, if there's just the fact that there's a wall is a problem. And it is an instinct for a lot of folks to be, when they get defensive, to put up walls.
Yeah.
And so if you are a CEO of a start, if you're a founder of a startup company, you really want to do some deep introspection before you go down this path to make sure that you have the emotional resilience to deal with, the challenges that are going to be thrown at you and not put up those walls and be willing to continue to build the trust with your key team. Because any wall, any block in communication with your CTO has got to be bound. If you're the CEO, you better be bound to your CTO at the hip or the brain or something. You'd better be, because if you're not, you're both going to feel hostage.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that. Couldn't agree more.
If 2 hostages both feel like they're hostages to each other, you're never going to negotiate a
truce.
A result, right? You can bring in all the hostage negotiators you want. Both sides are thinking, well, I'm the hostage.
Look at that.
The other guy, I'm the hostage.
We run out of time. We got to go.
Okay.
Look at that. And we continue to have great conversations once I found interest in your topics, the 2 of you. So thank you. Ike, any comments?
It was great to have you again, Keith. I think I really enjoyed this conversation, but also I think our technical founders will also find so many golden nuggets here. So thanks again. And everybody watching, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. See you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Keith. Bye-bye.
Thank you.